Hi, everyone. Good morning, good evening, middle of the day, middle of the night. So excited to have you all here. We're going to talk today with Keith and Shelby about SAP's transformation and innovation in customer success. I know that some people are still joining, but we already have most of the folks who've signed on. And since we're all in for the last 5 months have been experiencing some set of Zoom fatigue. We're going to try to make today's session very interactive. So feel free to ask your questions in the Q&A section of the Zoom interface. And we're going to flip between slides and live conversations. And hopefully this is going to be fun and very entertaining as well, but also learning and educational as we kind of go and talk about the largest customer success implementation in the world to date. And we've got the people that were in the making of all it, and can talk about the reasons, the journey, and what comes up next. So I'll introduce myself first. My name is Guy Nirpaz. I'm the CEO and founder of Totango. And with me, we've got Keith Strodman and Shelby Zaronada. Sorry, Shelby. And but why don't you guys go ahead and just introduce yourself, and we'll get it from there. So Keith, why don't you start?
Okay. Hello, everyone. Keith Strodman. I am COO of our Customer First organization at SAP, and that is a big part of our customer success organization. Really focused primarily on our cloud customers, but as you'll find out throughout the session today, that we're expanding that coverage. As Guy said, at the time that we did the implementation, I was the overall business owner of the Totango implementation. I've now broadened my responsibilities and am more a customer of Shelby and the Totango project team and program team inside of SAP. But happy to be here today and tell our story. Shelby?
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining. My name is Shelby Zarnata.
Yeah, sorry for butchering your name.
The C is silent. Just remember that.
Yeah.
I have been with SAP for about 15 years through the SuccessFactors acquisition, and I've worked for and with Keith Strodman here for several of those years. I'm responsible for running the Totango Customer Success Business Solution here at SAP. For primarily our cloud customer base and our customer success field, soon to expand to broader footprint of our customer base, and happy to be here today and share a bit of our story.
Perfect. So again, thanks very much for sharing with us and with the audience the story. And why don't we start from the beginning? So, I guess a little bit of background of how it all started and what was the context for the rest of the conversation. The genesis of SAP Customer First program and Customer First focus, and I'll share some slides as we go along. So who wants to take that, Shelby or Keith?
Get started. First of all, maybe a little context setting, just for those who don't know SAP. I'm sure at least know who SAP is, but just to give you a sense of some of the background that sets the context for our story is just the size and scale of SAP. We are one of the largest enterprise software companies in the world, and one of the more remarkable statistics that I always like to quote is that 77% of the world's revenue transactions flow through some SAP system. We've got 440,000 customers. We're in 180 countries. We've got over 100,000 employees. So it's a big organization, and that kind of sets the tone for the work that we had to do. We didn't just come to this evolution overnight. I mean, this was a multi-year journey that we were on. We went through many acquisitions to grow our cloud businesses, in addition to building out some of our own native cloud solutions. And as those capabilities and those solution offerings built up, so did separate customer success organizations and separate customer success practices. So a big part of what we did, even before we got into the technology realm, starting in the 2015 to 2016 timeframe, we started to do a lot of process harmonization, role clarification, and driving consistency in our practices before we even got started in the technology space. So that's a little bit of the background of what led us to the need for a technology solution. We recognized we needed a technology solution, but we knew that we would fail if we didn't do that groundwork around our process and our people harmonization first. And that was a key part of our success, I believe.
Is when you talk about identifying the need as a global organization, having a unified version of customer success, what was the foundational transformation that was needed? Shelby, maybe you want to take that.
Well, I think first and foremost, our customers were telling us, right, that we didn't feel like one organization. So with the acquisition history that Keith just shared, a success factors customer of SAP felt like a success factors customer, or an Ariba customer felt like an Ariba customer. And when that customer actually had both of those solutions, it was a totally different experience, how we were engaging, what we were engaging on. So I think that is obviously the primary driver of bringing all of these lines of business and solution teams together to drive the most consistent experience. And that's a lot easier said than done, right? And so when you have native applications and tools and practices within each of those entities, getting agreement and a harmonized approach is not easy, and it takes time, right? And so I think that was the primary driver, and I think that's where the bulk of the work continues to be, is harmonizing the people, the process, and listening to our customers as to how they want to experience SAP and what's most important to them.
So a quick piggyback questions on this. So it was all those businesses have customer success. So why was it different? Why wasn't that it's customer success? So why wasn't it all the same customer success? What was the reasons behind the diverse versions of customer success methods? Was it lack of understanding or different needs for different types of businesses?
Yeah, I can take that. I mean, it was a little bit of just the maturity of each of those businesses, the length of time that they had been in a cloud world. So, for example, many of our acquired solutions had fairly mature processes. There were some variations. So, for example, some lines of business had more of a combined customer success and services unit. So their processes tended to, kind of be a combined view of service delivery, and in many cases, for fee services combined with their success offering. Others had a pure success model. So part of it was just the maturity of their success practice. The other thing was the maturity of the products, of the individual products themselves. So some of these new products, like I said, some of the acquisitions quite mature. Some of the homegrown products were growing up from, moving essentially from an on-prem mindset to a cloud delivery model without even the recognition that cloud required a different level of customer success and guiding that customer through that journey toward value realization. So in some cases, they had no customer success function at all. So it really was important to kind of get everybody on the same page, so that, what the other key point that I'll make before I get to that is, in the early days, many of our customers only bought one of our cloud solutions. So they didn't notice some of the variations in the practices and in the experience that they had with SAP's cloud solutions. It wasn't until we started getting more and more multi-cloud solutions combined with our on-premise customers that customers started to notice the difference, and we started to recognize that we had to do something to give them a more consistent experience and manage the outcomes better for our customers.
Got it. So different products, different maturity models, and then a new engagement model for SAP to kind of leverage the expansion motion to be able to, one customer sell them another set of products. So was that the driver for the objectives? I mean, what were the core objectives of the project as you guys embarked on it?
Yeah, there were really three big things that we were focused on in terms of our core objectives. The first was just knowing our customers. It may sound funny, but we had lots of information about our customers, but it was spread across many systems, many solutions. It was very difficult to get a consolidated view of what products a customer had, what was the health of that customer, what was the status of even things like their satisfaction and so forth, because each of these solution areas had different systems. So a big part of it was to better understand our customers by getting a consolidated view of that customer, you know, and a system of truth, if you will. The second thing is we need to derive a more consistent experience, and that's where we talk about turning insights into action. SAP is a pretty sophisticated company when it comes to using data, but because the data was spread all over, we weren't good at turning that data into actionable items in a consistent way. So things like success plays, or, you know, alerts and triggers if there are risk situations, and how, you know, the kinds of things that would drive us to engage with the customer in a time of need. None of that was automated. So turning that data and that information into actions was a big driver. And then ultimately, I mean, you always have to have a real, you know, a selfish business reason. We wanted to drive, you know, customer for life, or you know, the retention of revenue, improve value realization for our customers, but also scale. So drive operational efficiency in our own organization. And Shelby will probably talk about a little bit later some of the future things that we're really focused on. We've already started to do some, but we really are focusing on now is more automation and digital delivery and so forth. So being able to touch more customers in a timely way helps us from an operational efficiency standpoint. So those were the primary objectives that drove us to a technology and a process re-engineering, if you will.
Got it. And you know, what was the kind of the scope of that? There was a question on the panel recently on the Q&A chat, whether was that just for cloud businesses, or did you see customer success that goes beyond just the cloud business into the on-premise business, or, you know, what was the initial thinking? What's the current thinking?
Well, I can take that one, Guy. I think if we were to rewind, I probably would have approached it differently, honestly. I think our scope initially was for cloud, primarily because that's where the focus was on harmonizing the process and the people and the playbooks. Now we're focused on bringing in the rest of our footprint, if you will, because the customer, frankly, doesn't care how we are deploying solutions to them, whether it be through public cloud or on-premise. They care about the experience overall. So yes, now we're focusing on bringing in full scope of customers to drive that consistent experience across, regardless of what deployment model they have.
Yeah, and I think this is very interesting for the audience, because, you know, when the focus is customers, then it's just the methods of how you create a unified customer first approach, not necessarily which products do they buy. And I think in many cases it's confusing, as customer success started initially and gained traction in the cloud SaaS business. We've been seeing that, you know, expanding beyond that for several years now. And what you're saying, Shelby, is, you know, just clarifies this even further. So let's switch gears. So you had a problem, you had that clarity of vision of where you want to deliver on it. What were you looking to solve from a technology perspective? What were the core capabilities that you know, you were shopping for?
Yeah, so I think to add on to Keith's comment about, we have a lot of data, right? We can do a lot of things with data from a presentation standpoint and from a dashboarding analytics standpoint. So, you know, it wasn't about transactional systems and customer information. That data exists at large scale at SAP. What we were really trying to solve for is, what is that data telling us? And then ultimately, how do we want our field to engage based on that data entering a certain threshold or KPI? Things like, you know, we have a new customer, we need to onboard that customer, triggering action, turning that data into action. Or our customer is, for example, dipping below a certain threshold of usage. Having our field be able to know that instantaneously and then triggering action to engage with the customer to mitigate any potential risk there, or health scores or NPS surveys. So our big focus was, how do we take all the data we have, and on the slide you're sharing here on the left side, right, all the transactional data, all the reporting data, all the KPIs, and how do we turn that into the right actions at the right time for our field? And so what we were coming from was field, go interpret all this data and figure out when it's the right time to engage with your customer, into a motion of we're going to tell you when it's the right time to engage with your customer.
Yeah. So if I kind of if I look at the slide that we currently have, which is I guess familiar for a lot of people in the audience. So the left-hand side is capturing the information and organizing it and making sense out of this, and the right-hand side, 4, 5, 6, and 7, is the part in which you take action systematically. Am I reading this correctly?
You are. And I would say on top of what I just said about actioning data is also using that data for digital scale, right? So, we talked a bit about every line of business having different tools and views into customers, but the other reality too was there's basic things like branding, how you communicate with your customer when you're onboarding them. And if you have 11 lines of business doing that in a slightly different way, customers feel it, right? And so part of the Totango solution was helping us solve for driving consistency on the right messaging and touch point with that customer with the right brand, pointing them to the right resources at the right time. So we have significantly leveraged that capability within Totango.
All right. So I guess the next question is, we had a big challenge, clear articulation of vision, and in many cases, turning that into reality is where things starts to become a little bit dicey and potentially fall apart. So how did you guys run the journey? What was the thinking behind execution here?
And I can take that first, and then I'll let Keith chime in because I'm sure he has a zillion opinions about this. So you can imagine in a 100,000 person company, there's lots of opinions, right? And there's lots of requirements. But boiling down, frankly, to this slide of what the capabilities were that we were looking to drive, but taking all of those significant requirements and translating those requirements into real use cases was a big part of it, right? What you put on paper doesn't always translate easily into technology. Anyone who's implemented cloud or has been a customer implementing a cloud solution knows that. The other piece I would say was scope. We had a very, very tight timeline to bring this to our field, and scope creep could have been pretty significant, but really keeping to the scope, which is really why we decided just start cloud-based to start. So scope was tight, and we'll get into in a little bit, what we kept within scope and what our key focuses were, which were primarily around onboarding and adoption. And then I think the third piece was, how do we tackle, we've got playbooks, we've got harmonized people and process. How do you actually translate that into, a little bit more technical here, but a data architecture? How do we really engage with customers at what level? And so determining, how your complex data sets come together and how your field is truly engaging with customers against, the overall account, the specific solutions, as well as the specific products. I can tell you, we started off with about 100 different use cases where the intent was to trigger all these tasks and actions to our field. And quickly we realized that this would be overwhelming and they would get fatigued. And were they really the right things? So really narrowing down those use cases, I think we ended up with 12 across onboarding and adoption.
So how did you narrow it down? What was the, how did you decide which 12 versus, was it like thinking about this from the user's perspective, from the customer perspective, from revenue impact? What how did you, how did you decide such a large company?
Yeah, so one of our guiding playbooks, if you will, was defining from a customer point of view, what is that touch point map? What do they really need engagement from SAP, albeit a digital form or a high touch form? What are those critical touch points? And there were a lot of them. And so we, quite literally got into a room and whiteboarded what were the most critical touch points to ensure that a customer who, signed a contract, was trying to get into an implementation, got off on the right foot, right? Had all the resources in their hands to do that, and their quick time to value was achieved, right? And so that's basic stuff, guys, right? That's, welcoming them. That's telling them how to, onboard into the solution and how to get to the resources that they need and how to set up governance around their project. So really basic stuff that frankly we weren't doing consistently before. And then when you get into adoption, there was a whole nother level of definition that we as a company had to define about what's good adoption, what's bad adoption, where do we need to engage if we see something dip below a certain threshold. So that was the other area of focus of making sure that we simplified how we determined for our field whether or not the customer was struggling with their adoption or not.
Yeah, and I would just add, Guy, one of the things that was that is a very strong culture at SAP, there's a very strong technology culture and product development culture. There's a very strong sales culture. And to some extent, and this ties back to what Shelby just said, our success processes became very renewal oriented. So we were running it like a sales cadence. And what we were finding is by the time we were really paying attention to a customer situation, it was too late. We hadn't paid close enough attention to the onboarding process and the adoption process. And by the time we got to the renewal, it was too late to impact the results of that renewal. So that shaped our strategy early on to say, we got the renewal stuff well covered. We can run that like a machine. Let's focus on the things that we're not so strong at, the onboarding and the adoption things. And that's where we implemented the technology first, was in those areas that were not our strengths. We tried to shore up our weaknesses first and then expand from there. Guy, I noticed there's some questions coming in. Would you mind if I just embellish on a couple of these questions?
Yes, right.
Yeah, Deepak asked a question about how we're infusing experience, and that's actually something that's very prominent at SAP, given an acquisition that we made about 18 months ago of Qualtrics. We try to infuse people experience and customer experience, product experience into everything we do, and a big part of that is coming into Totango now. So when we see customer experience or even our own employees' perceptions or attitudes toward what the customer experience is, we try to capture that and build that into our health scores, and try to use that data and that insight that we get from our experience platforms and programs, bringing that into Totango to take advantage of it in our success processes. So we're pretty early stages on that, pretty early meaning the last year or so, but it's getting more and more mature over time. And then there was another question from Ed about how partners play in. That's a big opportunity for us. And in fact, I just started a team to focus on how we better utilize our partners. A lot of our sales, especially in the smaller end of our customer segment, is sold through partners. So partners actually, are a key delivery point for not only selling activity and implementation activity, but now customer success activity. So our partners are actually building customer success CSMs, we call them CEs, into their delivery models as well. And we're helping to educate the partners on that. We're providing better data and insights so they have some of the same kind of insights we have about customers. So I just wanted to hit a few of those questions, Guy.
Yeah, we're gonna keep answering those questions. So keep them coming in the Q&A panel. We've got, I think, 6, 7 waiting. So we're gonna try to cover them. But maybe we're kind of move a little bit forward in the chronology of the implementation. So let's talk a little bit about the scale and first outcome of implementation, and clearly, I'm sure that a lot of the folks in the audience also want to know, what are some of the key learnings and where this is all going, right? For SAP, implement the largest customer success implementation in the world with Totango was definitely a remarkable achievement. But what are some of the implementation learnings? But more than that, how SAP is different today than it used to be before.
Let me set the stage, and then Shelby can go into some of the implementation learnings and some of the deeper stats. But the other piece that we did, Shelby mentioned this already, in terms of focusing our initial implementation. We did this initial implementation very rapidly, in just a little over 6 months. And a big part of that was our own data organization. A guy will remember us having to corral some of our data. make last minute decisions to fly to Germany to work on the data elements. But all of that said, a big part of what we tried to do is not only we kept our focus on those processes that I mentioned earlier, but also we kept the stakeholders focused directly on our dedicated customer success resources. So the initial release was about, I don't know, 1,800 people, depending on how you count it, that were pure customer success. And then we knew we were going to expand from there, because our whole customer first initiative at SAP is to make customer success a big part of our DNA across SAP. So I'll let Shelby talk about what she and her team have been doing to massively expand this coverage and the number of people that are participating in customer success and using Totango today.
Yeah, so the original go live set of users was about 1,200, and that consisted of CSMs, CEEs, and then their management operations support. We have since expanded, we're 18 months, 19 months in. We've expanded to over 13,000 users. And so one of the pillars that I've tried to at least guide from a gatekeeping standpoint, and I use that word because it's important that we don't do things that don't make sense, right? And so one of our guiding principles is that, data visibility isn't really a use case most of the time. And so how do all these additional user groups contribute to the process? And so that's one of the big questions we ask when we're trying to figure out a user group that wants to get in, has been prioritized in getting in. What are they actually doing to support the customer success lifecycle processes? So, that's been our principle throughout this run mode, if you will, since go live. But let me talk a little bit about the focus of the go live, and then we'll talk a little bit about what we've done since then. So again, as basic as it sounds, a single customer view was really critical to SAP. You can imagine my example of I'm a CSM in SuccessFactors. I have no idea generally what a CSM in Ariba was doing, or even what the footprint was of that customer, or what was at stake. And so this mindset, if you will, of customer first, SAP, and then line of business helped promote that single customer view. So with a single customer view, a 360 view, standardized KPIs, the entire account team, regardless of the line of business, CEs and CSMs, can see across the account. So they understand and they can collaborate together at what's at stake and what they're trying to promote for that customer as a whole versus in their silo. That was really important for SAP, bringing that transparency in and opportunity for collaboration. The simple workspace that is inherent in Totango that comes with that. It sounds again silly, but just managing tasks and touch points for your portfolio wasn't something that anyone really had in a standardized way. It was all on notepads or in Excel or in Outlook. So we hear a lot of positive feedback of just even having that workspace to understand the holistic picture and being able to manage work with their customers and with their account team in general. I mentioned also that onboarding, both insights into onboarding where our customers are at in their journey, and adoption and consumption were two parts of the life cycle that we really wanted to narrow our focus on. So onboarding customers, knowing who a new customer is, engaging that customer with the right content, introducing yourself to that customer, all of those elements of onboarding, sending the right messages to those customers. So as part of our Totango deployment, we've enabled and automated over 160 messages across multiple languages across all of those solutions, whereas before those customers often weren't getting any touch point at all.
And Shelby, I just mentioned that many of these touch points and stuff where we had started working on, as Shelby mentioned before, prior to the Totango implementation. So we did a lot of that groundwork on the process and the content and all those kinds of things ahead of time. And then Totango allowed us to scale and automate it.
Exactly.
So I guess there are a lot of questions in the forum, in the Q&A, which I'm trying to kind of figure out how did it actually change let's say the mindset in SAP, the behavior across organizations, And what was the role of technology in all that? I think this is, if I summarize at least 5 questions, that's going to basically, is it, can you talk to that point organizationally and where the technology kind of help in doing that?
Yeah, I'll start and then I'll Shelby add on. We were concerned about the change management, especially as it related to changes in processes, right? So people get very set in their ways and so forth, and changes is always difficult. The good news is, and many of you on the phone, I'm sure, are in technology companies, is our teams were hungry for a technology solution. They were tired of, kind of having to navigate across multiple systems and in many cases not even be able to find information that easily about, that they needed to engage with their customers. So from that perspective, there was a bit of a hunger, but we did spend time on change management. We had, mainly, I wouldn't say we did training as much as we did communications. Like, we communicated to the team about what was coming. We have an annual field kickoff every year. We made this new deployment a big theme in that kickoff. Again, we weren't sitting at a keyboard teaching people where to go in the system. We talked about what we were trying to achieve through the automation and standardization of our onboarding processes, of our adoption processes. And we actually did simulations in training that had nothing to do with the technology. It was more about what are we trying to achieve through these success processes. And then we said, by the way, there's a tool that's going to help you with this. And we did some more like follow-up online training to give them familiarity with how to get to the tool. It's pretty intuitive, so we don't have to do a lot of training, but there is online training available. But Shelby, anything you would add in terms of change management?
It doesn't end, right? I would say
True.
That's the biggest part you have to realize. It doesn't end.
Are you talking about COVID or about change management?
Well, that too. But yeah, no, change management is an ongoing effort. And again, minus the technology, just, the mindset of, if you've been working in an autonomy within a business that was acquired by SAP, and all of a sudden now you have to basically comply and follow a bunch of new rules for the good of the customer, albeit, but it doesn't happen overnight, right? And so that mindset change of, I'm in this for the customer, then SAP, then my line of business, is a hard one, and it doesn't change overnight. So change management is constant. I would say that one of my gauges, if you will, on how I can, just get a feel of how is that going and how is the technology helping, is that questions and support went from, I want this for my line of business, as an example, to, I need to see this and what's going on over here, and I need to contribute to that with my other counterpart. So the asks and the field engagement has shifted, and I can feel that with even just fielding stakeholder requests and end user requests. But again, it doesn't end. The change management never ends.
Yeah, and so there's a question from Raj on which is very recent or very relevant. The question is, how did you use Totango to solve COVID time issues on renewals, usage down, adoption? So I guess the question is customer success with Totango in the age of COVID.
I can kind of start with that a little bit. We have done some special things around COVID. I mean, including making some offers to customers that were things that we were uniquely positioned to be able to help our customers with. So we kind of went above and beyond and said, hey, first of all, do you realize you can use our solution to help you with this problem that COVID may be causing? And then, like I said, we also made additional services available. So for example, we put out a Qualtrics offering for customers to be able to take pulse checks around their employees and how they were feeling about working remotely, dealing with the COVID situation. So some of those kinds of things weren't directly related to our standard customer success offerings, but it was a way of empathizing with customers, getting them to making sure they knew that we are also dealing with COVID and that we are here to help them in any way that we could. Now, have we seen some reductions? We've mainly seen reductions in certain industries where there's volume reductions in usage and those kinds of things. And we've also tried to be as empathetic as we can, short of putting ourselves at peril, but giving customers extended terms, on payment terms, or in some cases even some credits or delayed implementations to help them navigate through the tough environment that we're in. But like I said, we first of all, we wanted to make sure we were talking to our customers and empathizing with them and listening to what they needed and trying to figure out how we could help them.
Got it. And in the meantime, I kind of shared the marketplace visual, the SuccessBook marketplace that has COVID-19 best practice that Totango kind of gathered from all of our customers, and we've packaged that in a SuccessBook. So if you are interested in understanding the response model for COVID and what's the best practice and others are doing, I highly recommend for you to take a look at that. So I think we've got roughly 5 minutes. So, where are we going from here, right? So implementation started 1,200 people, now over 13,000. Where this is all going from an SAP's point of view?
Well, let me frame it, and Shelby, again, we'll go into some more details. But for us, we're actually going through yet another transformation from an organizational standpoint at SAP to further bring together, and this actually touches on one of the questions out there, further bring together our customer experiences across both our cloud and our on-prem business. So we recently combined some of our on-premise customer success areas with our cloud success areas and created a new customer experience board area or services area within SAP. So a big part of what we're doing is expanding to look at our customers more holistically across cloud and on-prem. The on-prem has always been a very stable business. So again, it wasn't our starting priority, but now our customers are demanding that we look at them holistically and help them through their overall value realization, not just solution independent or just cloud, for example. So that's a big part of it. And then of where we're going in the future. And then the other big thing is we're going to be on this continuous journey of how do we scale better, right? We're still growing very rapidly. For a large company, our cloud business in particular is growing very rapidly. So we need to be able to be more efficient and more effective. We just can't keep throwing bodies at our customer success efforts. So things like digital engagement, things like making information more accessible and on demand for our customers, and then using data to help prompt the customer to engage with those on-demand assets and those on-demand capabilities. And on-demand could also be one-to-many.
Yeah, so let's see how well you're in sync, Shelby. You just need to continue.
Okay, well, I'll do my best, picking up where he left off. So, the digital scale engagement is big, and digital and/or tech touch kind of get used interchangeably here. But data-driven and automation, regardless of motion. The practice and tooling for on-premise customers, and harmonizing first and foremost, how do we engage with our customer as a customer regardless of their deployment model, and then Totango enabling that for us. We have this center-led approach where there's supporting resources similar to a VAT in pre-sales, where we get a notification that they're not using the product, and it's because how they implemented the product. There's resources that are center-led that also will start contributing to those processes within Totango. Our customer health scoring is an area that, as a big organization, we tend to struggle with, but ongoing improvements to our customer health scoring, leveraging some predictive models, and then a big focus on renewal KPIs and renewal planning as part of the overall success planning. That is a huge piece for me, because when you see all these questions in the Q&A of how do you know the impact you're having or not having, KPIs such as renewals, and did you achieve upsell, or did you grow the account, or did you churn anything, that is where you actually measure how do you know what you're doing in the middle actually matters, right? How do you know all of this engagement through onboarding and adoption is having an impact, whether it's automated or through a high touch motion. So that's a big part of our focus over the next couple of quarters. And then I just did share, and I think you have the slide up, maybe you don't, just some answers to some questions about, metrics around, usage and end user satisfaction and login and engaged usage rates. Number of success plays we're automating on a monthly basis to get engagement with our customers. Yes, exactly. The touch points that we're driving with our customers, the targeted messages that are reaching our customers that they're engaging on, and the open rate and click-through rates of those. So just a few metrics to share with all of you. I think that answers some of those questions that were in the Q&A.
Yeah, and we apologize in advance that we can't answer all of these questions. There's a lot of very good questions. So Lorena, I suggest that we will follow up with like a Q&A summary email of all of these questions, or maybe we'll add the answers as part of the YouTube video that we're going to share. By the way, this entire session is going to be available on YouTube. There's a channel called Everything Customer Success. So just go over there. I guess in the next few days you'll see this entire conversation, and we're going to add some comments there. So if you want to share with your peers, that is definitely available for you. And respecting everyone's time, I'd like to thank Shelby and Keith for sharing the story. I'm sure there's more to the story that is coming, and we will love to talk to you more about this in the next few months as well. But thank you very much for taking the time and sharing the story of the largest customer success implementation in the world with the audience. And for those of you who want to start with your journey of customer success and Totango, if you haven't already, you can simply go to the Totango website and sign up for your free account and get started. And with that, I wish everyone safe COVID. We never know when it's gonna end, but some good things happen as well. So thank you very much. Thanks, Keith. Thanks, Shelby, and thanks for Lorena for setting it up. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all for joining.